Opechancanough was the brother of Paramount Chief Powhatan, who was the Mmanitowoc or paramount leader of the Powhatan people in Senecomica. Paramount Chief Powhatan had inherited power from his mother as authority passed matrilineally in Powhatan society. The order of succession would have been Powhatan, then his eldest brother Opechancanough, followed by his other brothers Opechancanough and Kikataw. Powhatan also had two sisters, so they would have ruled after the brothers, and the eldest sister's children would have inherited the chiefdom, not Paramount Chief Powhatan's children. Out of this list, though, only Powhatan, Opechancanough, and Opechancanough were paramount chiefs. Opechancanough was referred to as Powhatan's brother, which could have meant full or half-brother, and the word may also have meant a mother's younger sister's son. Their ages were not well documented, but it seems they were of a very close age. At the time of his death, Opechancanough was said to be, albeit by an English account, nearly 100 years old. He was paramount chief from around 1628 or 1629 until his death in 1646, but held so much power that he was seen as an influential leader even before Paramount Chief Powhatan died. Officially, he was werewonce of the Yautnans, since their land bordered Monacan land to the west, and he had the strength and skill to hold the western borders. Opechancanough is part of the Jamestown story from the very beginning. In fact, he organized John Smith's capture in 1608 and took him to Paramount Chief Powhatan soon after. The capture of John Smith began an interesting relationship between Smith and the English and Paramount Chief Powhatan and his peoples. On one occasion, Opechancanough allegedly even sent his shooting glove and bracer to John Smith as a gift to show respect and win his favor. Even John Rolfe met and became friends with Opechancanough before Rolfe and Pocahontas went to England, with Rolfe indicating in a letter that Opechancanough loved him, even while both sides were constantly fighting. The in-law relationship was alleged to be a good one. As the threat of violence at the hands of the English grew, Paramount Chief Powhatan was forced to move his capital. First, he moved it from Werowocomoco to Orepax in 1609, and then farther west to Matchett near Opechancanough at Yautnund in 1614. With tensions rising, it made sense for Paramount Chief Powhatan to move closer to his strongest brother, but also to establish himself near a river where his people could still reach him by canoe. During Sir Thomas Dale's time at Jamestown around 1614, over the following 2 years is when Paramount Chief Powhatan's power started to decline and Opechancanoug's rose. When the English amplified their expansion efforts around 1614, Powhatan no longer had interest or ability to fight against them, but Opechancanough did. He appeared suddenly in the records of 1614 as a man who, quote, hath already the command of all the people, unquote. Many people had become willing to fight against the encroaching English, and Opechancanough had made many allies in his travels. By 1616, Powhatan had withdrawn almost entirely from public affairs during a time when his people were being pushed off their land, and his brothers and counselors' opinions differed on how to handle the English problem. This uncontrolled expansion by the English from 1614 to 1618 had come to a peak. Powhatan spent his last months before his death in April 1618 touring his territories and putting on an affable face to the English. After Powhatan died, Opechancanough started putting his plan into effect. That being said, even if Powhatan had lived, Opechancanough would have probably still organized his allies to attack the English. In the years leading up to the attack, Opechancanough prepared physically by gathering allies and supplies, but also psychologically by convincing the English that the paramount chiefdom was weakening and they barely had enough food to survive, thus lowering the English's guard. Powhatan men changed their names sometimes multiple times in their lives in symbolic alignment with great deeds they had performed. Although they were rarely called by these names in later records, Opechancanough changed his name to Sasopin, and Opechancanough changed his name to Mangapisaman before the events of 1622. On March 22, 1622, Opechancanoug's careful planning was put into effect. Opechancanough and his allies caught the English by surprise when they launched an attack on some of the English settlements, including Henricus and Martin's Hundred, killing a total of 347 people, an estimated quarter of the English population of Virginia at the time. The goal was to assert dominance, reclaim stolen land, and reestablish boundaries. The attack was devastating to the English, who did indeed pull back into fortified settlements closer to the coast and began plotting revenge. Opechancanough and Opechancanough took captives during the attack. The men were killed and the women were integrated into Powhatan society, as was customary. During 1623, Opechancanough and the English organized a meeting where the captives would be returned. Opechancanough hosted the meeting and organized a feast. Unbeknownst to those in attendance, including Opechancanough, the English poisoned the Powhatan's drinks. As the poison took effect, the English rushed to their boats, fired upon the poisoned Powhatan people, killing several dozen, and returned long enough to cut off, quote, parts of their heads, unquote, before leaving. Opechancanough had been the focus of the attack, being both poisoned and shot and assumed dead by the English, but remarkably, both he and Opechancanough survived. The records after 1624 become even sparser than before. Hostilities continued for several years, but as supplies to conduct raids on Powhatan towns became increasingly limited, and as morale amongst the Powhatan people declined, conflict began to wane. During this time, Opechancanough died and Opechancanough inherited the chiefdom. By 1634, the two groups were reportedly on fair terms, with trade and fighting still occasionally occurring. As more Europeans arrived, native groups lost more land and their populations dropped at an alarming rate, and many tribes disappeared entirely from the written record. By the 1640s, Opechancanough was somewhere in his 90s, and although he had physically declined, his intellectual and strategic abilities were as strong as ever. While England was in the midst of a civil war, he organized one final grand show of strength against the invaders who were destroying his world. With the help of the remaining tribes in the chiefdom, they attacked on April 18, 1644. They again took captives, but unlike 1622, after this attack, many of the groups left their lands entirely and moved away. The few that remained, like the Pamunkey, Chickahominy, and Nansemons, were constantly and relentlessly raided by the English. In the summer of 1646, Governor Berkeley led an attack on the Pamunkey and captured Opechancanough, now near the age of 100, taking him to Jamestown and throwing him in prison, where he was made a spectacle. While in prison, a guard shot him in the back, killing him. By the fall, Nakotawants, who would be the last Paramount Chief, was the new leader of the Powhatan people, and he agreed to a treaty that made all native peoples of Virginia, including groups not under Nakotawants' leadership like the Rappahannocks, subjects of the King of England, and divided Virginia into native and European land, forbidding travel across this border without possession of a special pass obtained at an English-controlled border fort. In some ways, Opechancanough played a bigger role in the Jamestown story than Powhatan, yet he is rarely discussed in history. So why is Opechancanough so important?
Opechancanough isn't going to be just important because of his role as the paramount chief of the tribes that make up the Powhatan chiefdom. He's also going to be important because of this 22 attack on the English. Through this, he is re-solidifying that unity in the Powhatan chiefdom, bringing those people back together after they've been dealing with English attacks and trying to fend for themselves for quite a bit. And with that, he is successful in his short-term goals of trying to push the English back. Unfortunately, because of the strong foothold that the English already have here, he's unsuccessful in achieving those long-term goals. In a modern setting, he's going to be important for our tribes here today because of the fortitude, the strength, courage, and all the other great personality traits that he possesses. These are all going to make him a very charismatic and strong leader for the chiefdom, and is what's going to make him a great example of leadership for Powhatan society even today.